18-year-old Zachary Davis stood in that Ohio courtroom wearing a pressed white shirt and tie, looking like any college freshman heading to his first day of classes. The prosecutor was describing how he had stabbed Kim Mager 30 times in her own kitchen while her son listened to music upstairs, completely unaware his mother was being murdered just 20 feet below him. And as those horrific details filled the courtroom, as Kim's family sobbed in the front row, Zachary Davis smiled. Not a nervous twit or an uncomfortable grimace, a genuine, chilling smile that made the jury visibly recoil in disgust. He thought his honor student facade and clean record would protect him from real consequences. He thought his age would shield him from life behind bars. He was catastrophically wrong. Because the prosecutor was about to reveal text messages Davis sent just hours after the murder. Messages that would destroy every defense strategy and expose the true monster hiding behind that perfect smile. Stories like this remind us that justice always finds its way, even when a killer hides behind youth and a perfect smile. If you believe in accountability for those who betray trust in the most horrific ways, subscribe now and share your thoughts below. This is how one mother's ordinary evening became her last, and how her killer's mask finally slipped. This is how it all began. Delphos, Ohio, is the kind of place where people don't just lock their doors, they leave them open for neighbors. It's a small town of 7,000 people where Friday night football is a religion and everyone knows everyone's business. Kim Mager was the heart of this community. A 47-year-old nurse who spent her life healing others, she had opened her home to her son's best friend, Zachary Davis. She fed him, treated him like a second son, and gave him a safe haven from his own troubled home life. She trusted him completely. On the evening of June 4, 2012, Kim pulled into her driveway with groceries for a lasagna dinner, smiling at the radio, completely unaware that the boy she had welcomed into her family was waiting inside with a 10-inch kitchen knife and a plan to see what murder felt like. Or Chapter 1. The Smile That Haunted. A courtroom. The Allen County Courthouse in Ohio is a building steeped in history, a place where the gravity of the law usually suppresses even the most defiant spirits. But in September 2013, the atmosphere inside was charged with a different kind of energy, a mix of horror and disbelief that centered entirely on the young man sitting at the defense table. Zachary Davis, 18 years old at the time of his trial, looked like he belonged in a college lecture hall, not a defendant's chair. He wore a crisp white shirt and a tie, his hair neatly combed, presenting the image of the honor student he had been. He was a member of the National Honor Society, a debate team captain, the kind of kid parents pointed to as an example. But as the prosecutor began to detail the events of June 4, 2012, that image shattered. The prosecutor described a scene of unimaginable brutality. A kitchen floor slick with blood, a mother stabbed 30 times in her own home, and her son upstairs, oblivious. Listening to music while his best friend butchered her. As these horrific details filled the silent courtroom, something disturbing happened. Zachary Davis didn't cry. He didn't look down in shame. Instead, his lips curled upward. It was a smile, unmistakable, genuine, and chilling. It was the look of someone remembering a fond memory, not someone facing judgment for a heinous crime. The jury visibly recoiled. A collective gasp rose from the gallery where Kim Mager's family sat, clutching each other in disbelief. That smile stripped away the facade of the clean-cut teenager and revealed something far darker underneath. The cognitive dissonance in that room was suffocating. On the screens, the jury saw photos of the blood-soaked kitchen, the overturned furniture, the sheer violence of the attack. Then they looked at Davis, who sat there with the casual arrogance of a boy who believed he was smarter than everyone in the room. He thought his youth would shield him. He believed that the system would look at his age, his grades, and his lack of a prior record, and see a tragedy rather than a crime. He thought he could convince them it was a moment of madness, a snap in reality. He was banking on the jury seeing a child, not a monster. He thought wrong. The prosecutor wasn't just relying on emotional shock, He had the receipts. He revealed the digital footprint that Davis had left behind, evidence that would dismantle any defense of temporary insanity. He projected a text message onto the screen, sent from Davis's phone at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the murder, just 3 hours after Kim Mager took her last breath. "Just did something crazy," it read. "I feel so alive right now. Can't explain it." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Those weren't the words of a traumatized child or a remorseful accidental killer. Those were the words of a thrill-seeker who had just crossed the ultimate line and enjoyed it. Judge Barbara Gorman watched the proceedings with a stern expression, her eyes fixing on the defendant, who seemed to treat the trial as a bore. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the tension like a knife. She addressed the defense's attempts to paint Davis as a victim of his own mind, stating clearly that evil can wear the face of youth. She promised that the court would respond with the full weight of justice. For the first time, Davis's smile faltered. You could see the realization dawn in his eyes as he did the math. In Ohio, aggravated murder with prior calculation meant life without parole. It meant dying in a concrete box. But even then, the arrogance didn't fully dissipate. As the guilty verdict was read and the bailiff approached with the handcuffs, the final act of disrespect played out. Davis turned toward the gallery, locking eyes with Justin Mager, his former best friend, the boy whose mother he had just murdered. He didn't offer a tearful plea for forgiveness. He simply mouthed, "Sorry, bro," and gave a casual shrug. It was the kind of apology you give for borrowing a video game and forgetting to return it, not for destroying a family. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of outrage. The disconnect between the gravity of his crime and his complete lack of remorse was absolute. And the image of that smirk would haunt everyone present long after the trial ended. It was the face of a new kind of killer, one who killed not for passion or money or revenge, but for curiosity. As the judge prepared to deliver the sentence, the smirk finally faded into confusion. The reality of a life sentence was crashing down. But to truly understand how an honor student became a cold-blooded killer, we have to leave the sterile courtroom and go back to a peaceful street in Delphos, Ohio, 6 months earlier. We need to meet the woman whose kindness was repaid with unimaginable violence. Chapter 2. Kim Mager, the mother who opened her heart. Delphos, Ohio, is the quintessential American small town. With a population of just 7,000, it's the kind of place where the rhythm of life is dictated by the seasons and the school calendar. And Friday night football games aren't just sporting events. They are community rituals where the entire town gathers under the stadium lights. It's a town of tree-lined streets, front porches, and unlocked doors, a place where neighbors are family and safety is taken for granted. In Delphos, tragedy is something that happens on the news, in big cities far away, not in the kitchen of the house next door. Kim Mager was the embodiment of this community spirit. At 47 years old, she had spent nearly half her life, 23 years, working as a registered nurse at Lima Memorial Hospital. To her colleagues, she was known simply as the heart of the floor. She was the nurse who volunteered for the hardest shifts, the holidays and the overnights, so that others could be with their families. She was the one who stayed late to hold the hand of a dying patient when their family couldn't make it in time. She brought homemade cookies to the pediatric ward and treated every patient, regardless of their background, with the same tenderness she would show her own child. Her compassion didn't end when she clocked out. Kim was a fixture at the local food bank every Saturday morning, organizing donations with military precision and a warm smile. She led youth activities at her church and fostered rescue dogs, often ending up with a chaotic, happy house full of animals waiting for their forever homes. Her own home was the neighborhood gathering place. It was the house where the kids knew the pantry was always stocked with snacks, where they could get help with their homework or just find a listening ear. Our former students of her son would visit years after graduation, sitting at her kitchen island, calling her Mom Number 2. Kim's world revolved around her son, Justin. Though she and her ex-husband Tom were divorced, they remained close friends and dedicated co-parents. Justin, 17 years old at the time, was the center of Kim's universe. She worked those grueling night shifts specifically so she could be awake and present for every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. Her phone wallpaper wasn't a landscape or a pet. It was a photo of Justin at his recent graduation, captioned simply, "My greatest achievement." They were a team, navigating the teenage years with a bond that was the envy of many. This open-hearted nature extended to Justin's friends, specifically Zachary Davis. Justin and Zach had been best friends since middle school, an inseparable pair bonded by video games and shared adolescence. Davis practically lived at the Mager house. He ate dinner there 4 nights a week, slept over on weekends, and called Kim Mom. Kim knew that Davis's home life was troubled, that he felt neglected and unseen by his own parents. So she did what she always did. She expanded her circle of care. She welcomed him unconditionally, treating him like a second son. She never suspected that the boy she was feeding and sheltering was concealing a darkness that was about to consume them all. The evening of June 4th, 2012, began like hundreds of others before it. Kim finished her shift at the hospital at 6 p.m., tired but content. On her way home, she stopped at the grocery store. She wasn't just buying staples. She was buying ingredients for lasagna, Davis's favorite meal, which he had requested that very morning. She texted Justin from the checkout line. "Zach coming for dinner?" Justin replied instantly, "Yeah, he's already here." Kim sent back a heart emoji. It would be the last communication she ever had with her son. Neighbors would later recall seeing Davis arrive at the Mager house around 5 p.m. He was carrying his usual backpack, looking like any other teenager. He even waved cheerfully to Mrs. Henderson next door and helped her carry a bag of groceries up her porch steps, the picture of a polite, helpful young man. No one could have guessed the contents of his backpack. Wrapped in a towel, nestled between school books, was a 10-inch kitchen knife he had taken from his own home that morning. As Kim's car pulled into the driveway at 6:47 p.m., a security camera from across the street captured the mundane moment. You can see her grocery bags through the window. You can see her head bobbing slightly, likely singing along to the radio. She looked relaxed, happy to be home. She walked up the path to her front door, expecting a normal family dinner, laughter, and the comfort of her routine. Instead, she was walking into a nightmare that had been meticulously planned for weeks. She walked into her home, and the trap snapped shut. Chapter 3. 30 Wounds and a Son. Upstairs. The reconstruction of the crime scene paints a picture of a domestic setting turned into a slaughterhouse within minutes. Kim entered the house through the garage door at 6:47 p.m. Inside, the house was filled with the familiar sounds of teenage life. Zachary Davis and Justin Mager were in the living room, immersed in a video game. Kim called out a cheerful greeting as she passed through, heading straight for the kitchen to unload her groceries. Justin, wearing his noise-canceling headphones, gave a wave but stayed focused on the screen. It was a scene of perfect normalcy. Then Davis stood up. He told Justin he was going to help Kim with dinner and walked calmly into the kitchen. The forensic timeline places the attack at approximately 6:52 p.m. Kim was standing at the kitchen counter, her back turned to the room as she put away the groceries she had just bought. She was defenseless, safe in her own home, with a boy she trusted standing behind her. Davis didn't hesitate. He approached her silently, the knife already drawn from his waistband where he had transferred it from his backpack. The first blow was struck with terrifying force, a deep stab wound between her shoulder blades that severed major nerves and likely paralyzed her instantly with shock. Kim collapsed forward, knocking over a grocery bag. Apples spilled across the floor, rolling away in every direction. What followed was not a brief scuffle, but a prolonged and brutal execution. The medical examiner's report would later detail 30 distinct stab wounds. They were everywhere: her back, her chest, her neck. There were defensive wounds on her hands and forearms, heartbreaking evidence that Kim had fought back. She had overturned a chair in her struggle. Her fingernails were broken. Skin cells found under her nails would later be matched to Davis, proving she had clawed at her attacker in a desperate bid for survival. The attack lasted 4 to 5 minutes. She tried to crawl toward the phone on the counter, leaving a smear of blood on the tile, but she never reached it. The most disturbing aspect of the crime was the silence. Upstairs, or in the next room, Justin sat with his headphones on, blasting music, completely unaware that his mother was fighting for her life just feet away. Davis had planned for this. He knew Justin's habits. He knew that once the headphones were on, the world outside disappeared. The murder happened in a terrifying quiet, punctuated only by the sounds of struggle that were too muffled to penetrate Justin's digital cocoon. Davis later admitted to police that he timed the attack specifically for this reason, and he wanted privacy for his experiment. Forensic investigators found chilling evidence of premeditation scattered throughout the scene. Davis had placed towels near the kitchen entrance before the attack began, intended to muffle sounds and catch blood spatter. He had locked the back door from the inside, cutting off Kim's only escape route. He had positioned himself perfectly between Kim and the other exits. This wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden snap of rage. It was a calculated, strategic operation carried out by a boy who treated murder like a logic puzzle. After Kim stopped moving, the true depth of Davis's coldness revealed itself. He didn't flee in panic. He stood over the woman who had fed him and loved him, and he calmly walked to the sink. He washed the blood from his hands. He opened his backpack and took out a clean shirt he had brought with him, changing out of his blood-spattered clothes. He wrapped the murder weapon and his bloody shirt in the towels he had staged and placed everything back into his backpack. Then, in a move that defies comprehension, he walked back into the living room, sat down next to Justin, and picked up his controller. He resumed playing video games as if nothing had happened. At 8:15 p.m., nearly an hour and a half after the murder, Justin paused the game. He was hungry and realized his mom hadn't called them for dinner yet. He walked into the kitchen, expecting to see her cooking lasagna. Instead, he found a horror show. His mother lay on the floor surrounded by a pool of congealing blood, her eyes open and unseeing. The grocery bags were still scattered, the apples sitting in the crimson tide. His screams were primal, loud enough to bring neighbors running from across the street. When police arrived, they found Justin hysterical on the lawn. But inside, they found Zachary Davis sitting calmly on the couch. He looked up at the officers and said, "I don't know what happened. We were just playing games." Officer Michael Torres, the first responder on the scene, would later testify with a shaking voice. "I've worked 20 years in law enforcement," he told the court. "I've never seen anything like that kitchen. The violence was incomprehensible. And that boy, Davis, he was just sitting there, completely calm, like he was waiting for a pizza delivery. Not surrounded by police at a murder scene." The visual of the crime scene was seared into the minds of everyone who saw it. The mundane groceries mixed with the carnage, the shattered glasses, the apple rolling into the blood. She'd bought ingredients for his favorite meal. He'd brought ingredients for murder. And upstairs, her son had listened to music, unaware his world had just ended. Chapter 4. The interrogation where evil smiled. The police separated the two boys immediately. Justin, hysterical and covered in his mother's blood from trying to help her, was taken to a neighbor's house where a victim advocate tried to calm him down. Zachary Davis, however, was transported to the police station. He wasn't officially a suspect yet, At least not on paper, but every officer's instinct was screaming. He was too calm, too clean. But Detective Sarah Mitchell noted in her initial report, "Subject showed no emotional response to friend's mother's death. No tears, no shock, no appropriate affect whatsoever." At 9:30 p.m., the initial interview began. Davis sat in the interrogation room, arms crossed casually, looking more like a student waiting for a guidance counselor than a young man at the center of a homicide investigation. When asked to describe the evening, he provided a detailed timeline that was almost too perfect. He arrived at 5 p.m. They played games. They heard nothing. His story was mechanical, rehearsed. There was no tremor in his voice, no confusion. When he described finding the body with Justin, his tone didn't shift. It was as if he were describing finding a lost set of keys. Detective Mitchell decided to employ a strategic bluff. She leaned forward, saw her eyes locking onto his. "Zachary," she said quietly, "we found something interesting on your clothes. Do you want to explain it?" The forensics hadn't actually returned yet, but she needed to shake him. For a split second, Davis's eyes flickered. It was a brief flash of panic, quickly suppressed. "I don't know what you mean," he said. Mitchell pressed harder. "Blood spatter. On your shoes. Kim's blood." There was a long pause. Davis looked at the floor, then back at Mitchell. And then he smiled. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a genuine, relaxed smile. "Okay," he said. "You got me." What followed was one of the most chilling confessions in Ohio criminal history. Davis didn't just admit to the crime. He described it with clinical detachment. He used phrases like, "I positioned myself strategically," and "I calculated the angle for maximum efficiency." He spoke about the murder of the woman who was like a second mother to him, as if it were a science project. When Mitchell asked the question that was burning in everyone's mind, "Why?" Davis's response sucked the air out of the room. "I wanted to know what it felt like," he said flatly. "To kill someone. I've thought about it for years. Kim was convenient." He explained his twisted reasoning with terrifying clarity. He had been fascinated with murder since he was 13. He consumed violent media, researched serial killers, and fantasized about the act of killing. He chose Kim not because he hated her, but because she trusted him. "She was nice to me," he said, void of any irony. That made it easier. She never suspected anything. He explained that the layout of the house provided the opportunity, and he knew Justin's gaming schedule perfectly. It was a crime of opportunity born from a desire for a thrill. While Davis was confessing, crime scene technicians were building an ironclad physical case. They found his fingerprints on the handle of the knife. They found microscopic blood spatter on his jeans, evidence that he hadn't managed to clean everything. Most damning of all, they found his DNA under Kim's fingernails, proof of her desperate fight. Security footage from a neighbor's camera showed him arriving with a bulging backpack and leaving with the same bag hours later. Forensic analysis of Davis's phone revealed a search history that was a roadmap to murder. How long does it take to bleed out from stab wounds? Do security cameras record audio? How to clean blood from clothes? These searches dated back 3 weeks, proving extensive premeditation. He had even researched Kim's work schedule to know exactly when she would arrive home. The interrogation footage captured the moment that would later horrify the jury. As Davis described Kim's final moments, the struggle, and the silence that followed, he let out a quiet, satisfied chuckle. It was a sound of pure evil. Detective Mitchell, visibly disturbed, asked him directly, "Do you feel any remorse?" Davis considered the question for a moment, tilting his head. "No," he said. "Should I? It's done now. Can't change it." The freeze frame of that video shows Davis leaning back in the metal chair, arms behind his head, a casual smile on his face. The timestamp reads 11:47 p.m. At that exact moment, he was texting a friend about feeling alive. He had confessed to murder, he had smiled through the details, and he still believed his age would save him from real consequences. He was about to learn otherwise. Chapter 5. The Text Messages That Destroyed His Defense. The seizure of Zachary Davis's cell phone provided the prosecution with their most powerful weapon. While physical evidence proved he committed the act, the digital evidence proved why. It revealed the mind of a predator in the making. The defense team would later try to argue that these messages were just dark humor or teenage edginess, common among boys his age. But the content was too specific, too chronological, and too damning to be anything other than a confession in real time. And 3 weeks before the murder, the planning began. Davis texted a friend, "Been thinking about something crazy, like really crazy. Can't stop thinking about it." The friend replied, "What?" Davis wrote back, "Tell you later, when I do it." 2 weeks prior, the messages grew darker. You ever wonder what it actually feels like to cross that line? When his friend replied, "Dude, you're scaring me," Davis responded with chilling arrogance, "Don't be scared, be impressed." On June 4th, 2012, the day of the murder, the texts became a countdown. At 2:15 p.m., he wrote, "Today might be the day." At 4:30 p.m., as he prepared to leave his house with the knife in his backpack, "Heading to Justin's. Wish me luck." At 6:45 p.m., moments before Kim pulled into the driveway, "She just got home. It's happening." And then the text that would seal his fate, sent at 11:47 p.m. after he had been taken to the police station but before he was formally charged. "Just did something crazy. Feels so alive right now. Can't explain it." The recipient of these texts was 17-year-old Marcus Webb. When he took the stand, he was visibly shaking, carrying the weight of guilt and trauma. "I thought he was joking," Webb testified, tears streaming down his face. "Zach was always saying weird stuff for attention. I never imagined he actually meant he was going to kill someone." His testimony established premeditation beyond a shadow of a doubt. Davis wasn't snapping, he was broadcasting his intentions. Investigators also uncovered a secret Tumblr account Davis maintained under a pseudonym. It was a digital shrine to violence. He posted crime scene photos from famous murders. He quotes from serial killers and his own disturbing writings. One post from May 2012 read, "Society says murder is wrong, but society is scared of people who aren't afraid to explore the ultimate taboo. Soon, I'll join the ranks of those who dared." Dr. Raymond Chen, a court-appointed forensic psychologist, evaluated Davis and the digital evidence. His report was unequivocal. Subject displays pronounced antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic traits, and a complete lack of empathy, he wrote. He views other human beings as objects for experimentation. He shows no capacity for genuine remorse. He is highly intelligent and used that intelligence to plan and execute a murder for personal gratification. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery was a handwritten journal hidden in the air vent of Davis's bedroom. The entries spanned 2 years and detailed an escalating obsession with violence. He wrote about specific plans for the event, his term for the murder. One entry, dated March 2012, read, "Chosen my target. She trusts me completely. That's what makes her perfect. Trust is the ultimate vulnerability." The defense had hoped to build an insanity defense, arguing that Davis couldn't distinguish right from wrong. But the prosecution countered with his own words. "I know I'll go to prison if caught," he wrote in his journal, "but the experience will be worth it. I'll be famous." He knew the consequences. He just didn't care. He had documented his own descent into evil, creating a paper trail that led straight to a life sentence. The visual of the split screen in the courtroom was devastating. On one side, Davis's smiling senior photo from the school website. On the other, the journal page describing Kim Mager as the perfect victim. Every text, every search, every journal entry built an unbreakable case. He had documented his own evil. And now, those words were about to condemn him. Chapter 6. Try me as a what? Allen County Prosecutor Jurgen Waldick faced a critical decision. In Ohio, a 17-year-old is legally a juvenile, but the law allows for transfer to adult court for serious crimes. If Davis were tried as a juvenile, the maximum penalty would be detention until age 21. He would be free to walk the streets in 4 years. Given the brutality, the premeditation, and the complete lack of remorse, Waldick knew that wasn't justice. He filed a motion to transfer the case to adult court. This was not a childish mistake, Waldick told the press. This was a calculated, sadistic murder. The community demands adult accountability. Public defender Lisa Hernandez had the impossible task of defending the indefensible. She knew she couldn't argue innocence, so she focused on mitigation. The defendant suffers from severe mental illness, she argued in her filings. He was failed by the mental health system and should receive treatment, not life imprisonment. Adult prison will destroy any possibility of rehabilitation for a troubled teenager. Her strategy relied on painting Davis as a victim of his own biology. Judge Barbara Gorman presided over the 4-day certification hearing that would determine jurisdiction. The prosecution presented their overwhelming evidence, the journal, the texts, the planning. They argued that Davis was a danger to the community who could not be rehabilitated in the juvenile system. The defense countered with mental health experts who argued that Davis's brain wasn't fully developed, citing neuroscience about adolescent impulse control. During the hearing, Davis's behavior was shocking. He smirked during testimony about Kim's injuries. He doodled cartoon figures on a notepad while victim impact statements were read. He yawned visibly during psychological testimony about his lack of empathy. When the judge asked him if he understood that these proceedings could determine his entire future, he shrugged. "I guess so," he said. "Doesn't really matter either way." Justin Mager, now 18, delivered testimony that brought tears to the eyes of everyone in the courtroom, except the defendant. "Zach was my best friend," Justin said, his voice breaking. "I trusted him completely. My mom trusted him completely. She fed him, housed him, loved him like her own son, and he murdered her while I was upstairs. I heard nothing. I could have saved her. That guilt will haunt me forever. But the person responsible sits over there, smiling, like this is all some joke." After overnight deliberation, Judge Gorman delivered a historic ruling. "While the defendant is chronologically a minor," she stated, "his actions demonstrate adult-level planning, brutality, and a complete absence of conscience." His own words, "I wanted to know what it felt like," reveal this was not an impulsive act, but a calculated experiment in murder. The severity of this crime and the ongoing danger necessitate adult prosecution. Motion granted. Prosecutor Waldick immediately filed formal charges carrying unprecedented penalties: aggravated murder with prior calculation and design, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse for moving the body during the crime. Combined, Davis faced a potential death sentence or life without parole. The media explosion was immediate. Teen honor student charged as adult in mother's brutal murder. The defense approached the prosecution with a desperate plea offer: guilty to lesser charges in exchange for 30 years to life with parole eligibility. Waldick consulted the Mager family. Tom Mager, Kim's ex-husband, was adamant. "No deal," he said. "He planned this. He executed it. He smiled about it. Let the jury decide his fate. Kim deserves nothing less than full justice." The courtroom sketch from that day shows Davis with a clean-cut appearance, but his eyes are cold and calculating, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The system had spoken. Zachary Davis would be tried as an adult. But he still didn't believe it would matter. He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Chapter 7. Building the Unbreakable Case. Lead prosecutor Jürgen Waldick assembled a war room filled with 9 months of investigation. He knew that even with a confession, trials are unpredictable. He needed an unbreakable case. He had forensic evidence, blood spatter, DNA, fingerprints. He had digital evidence, the texts, the searches, the journal. He had witness testimony from Justin, Marcus Webb, and neighbors. And he had the psychological evaluation diagnosing Davis with antisocial personality disorder. Each piece reinforced the others, creating a web of guilt from which there was no escape. Defense attorney Hernandez faced a nightmare scenario. She couldn't dispute the facts. The evidence was too overwhelming. Her only path was mitigation. She planned to argue mental illness, youth, and brain development. She wanted to humanize Davis, to present him as sick rather than evil, arguing for treatment over permanent incarceration. But finding witnesses to support this narrative proved nearly impossible. Dr. Patricia Wong, an expert criminalist, spent weeks analyzing the blood spatter in Kim's kitchen. Her findings were chilling. The spatter on the ceiling indicated overhead stabbing motions with extreme force. Cast-off patterns showed repeated stabbing in rapid succession. Void patterns proved Davis stood in specific positions, moving deliberately around his victim. This wasn't a frenzied rage, Wong concluded in her report. This was methodical, sustained violence. Medical examiner Dr. Robert Hayes documented the catastrophic injuries. 30 distinct stab wounds. 8 were individually fatal. The defensive wounds on Kim's hands and forearms indicated she fought for several minutes before succumbing. Toxicology was clean. She was completely sober and aware during her murder. The time of death was established at 6:52 p.m., just minutes after she entered the house. The prosecution lined up an emotional gauntlet of witnesses. Justin Mager would speak to the devastation of losing his mother and best friend in one night. Tom Mager would provide the family perspective. Kim's nursing colleagues would testify to her character. Neighbors would describe Davis's deceptive normalcy. And Dr. Chen would destroy the insanity defense with his psychological evaluation. Hernandez struggled to find anyone to speak for Davis. His parents declined to testify, their relationship strained and broken. His father reportedly told investigators, "I don't know my own son." Teachers gave lukewarm testimony about his grades, but noted an emotional disconnect. Former friends distanced themselves publicly. The defense was left relying primarily on paid expert witnesses. Both sides worried about the jury. The prosecution feared sympathy for a child defendant, despite the adult charges. The defense feared the pro-victim sentiment in a small town where everyone knew Kim. A jury consultant advised the prosecution, "Show them the journal entries first. Once they read his own words about selecting her as the perfect victim, his age becomes irrelevant." While awaiting trial, Davis did himself no favors. He accumulated disciplinary infractions at the juvenile detention facility. He fought with other inmates, disrespected staff, and attempted to smuggle contraband. Most damningly, corrections officers documented him bragging about the murder to other detainees. Inmate Davis shows no remorse, a report read. Frequently discusses crime with pride, refers to victim with dehumanizing language. The prosecution planned to introduce this behavior as proof of ongoing danger. Waldick reviewed his trial binders, labeled forensics, digital evidence, confession, journal, and psychological evaluation. The stack grew taller each day. The evidence mountain was insurmountable. The verdict seemed inevitable. But in a courtroom, nothing is guaranteed until 12 citizens speak their truth. Chapter 8. Opening Statements. The battle lines. Drawn. The trial began in March 2013, 9 months after the murder. The courtroom was overflowing. The Major family occupied the front row behind the prosecution table, a united front of grief. The media filled the designated section, cameras ready. Community members lined up before dawn for the limited public seating. Security was heightened, with metal detectors and additional bailiffs. The tension was palpable, a physical weight in the room. Zachary Davis entered wearing a Navy suit, an attempt by his attorney to make him appear younger and more sympathetic. His hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore glasses he didn't actually need. He no longer displayed the obvious smirk, but his expression remained flat and disconnected. He deliberately avoided eye contact with the Major family, sitting rigidly at the defense table, occasionally whispering to his attorney. Judge Gorman addressed the jury with unusual gravity. You will hear disturbing evidence, including graphic crime scene photos and the defendant's own words describing the murder, she warned. You must base your verdict solely on the facts presented, not emotion. The defendant's age is a factor you may consider, but youth does not excuse premeditated murder. Then your duty is determining guilt or innocence beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecutor Waldick approached the jury box with measured intensity. On June 4, 2012, Kim Mager worked her hospital shift, stopped at the grocery store, and went home expecting an ordinary family dinner with her son and his best friend, he began. That friend, Zachary Davis, had other plans. He'd spent weeks planning her murder. He'd brought a weapon to her home. He'd waited for the perfect moment. Then he stabbed her 30 times while her son was upstairs, unaware his mother was being slaughtered in their kitchen. Waldick methodically walked the jury through the timeline. Kim's selfless character, her kindness to Davis, his secret obsession with murder, the meticulous planning, the brutal execution, and the casual aftermath. And he emphasized premeditation through the journal entries and text messages. The defendant didn't snap, Waldick concluded. He didn't lose control. He executed a plan months in the making, and afterward he texted his friend, "Feel so alive right now." Those are his words, his truth, and they reveal exactly who he is. Defense attorney Hernandez took a dramatically different approach. Zachary Davis is 18 years old, she argued. He suffers from severe, undiagnosed mental illness that went untreated for years. He grew up in an emotionally neglectful home with parents who ignored obvious warning signs. He consumed violent media that warped his developing brain. He made a terrible, terrible decision that he'll regret for the rest of his life. But he is not the monster the prosecution wants you to see. And he is a sick teenager who desperately needed help he never received. She argued that the murder was the result of mental illness, not evil. Yes, he killed Kim Mager. That fact is not disputed. But the question before you is, did he understand the wrongfulness of his actions? Could he control his impulses? Neuroscience tells us teenage brains lack fully developed frontal lobes, the part controlling judgment and impulse control. Zachary's brain, further compromised by mental illness, simply couldn't process consequences the way an adult brain would. The camera captured Justin Mager, now 18, sitting beside his father Tom. Both wore blue ribbons, Kim's favorite color, pinned to their lapels. Justin's jaw clenched as Waldick described his mother's final moments. Tom clutched a photo of Kim in her nursing scrubs. He neither could look at Davis throughout the opening statements. And Davis never looked back, maintaining an emotional distance that chilled the room. The battle lines were drawn. The evidence would speak next, and its voice would be deafening. Chapter 9. When the crime scene spoke, Officer Michael Torres took the stand first. He described responding to Justin's 911 call. Dispatch said possible homicide, son found mother's body, he testified. When I arrived, I heard screaming from inside the house. Justin was on the front lawn, covered in his mother's blood from trying to help her, hysterical. I entered the kitchen and... Torres paused, visibly affected even months later. "I've never seen that level of violence, blood, wounds, clear evidence of a sustained attack. It was incomprehensible." Then came the most emotionally powerful witness, Justin Mager. Now 18, he took the stand, trembling. He described the ordinary evening, playing video games with Zach, wearing headphones, completely unaware. "I came downstairs around 8:15 looking for Mom to ask about dinner," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I walked into the kitchen and—" Justin broke down completely, unable to continue. The judge called a recess. When testimony resumed, Justin's voice was hollow. "My best friend murdered my mother while I was 20 feet away. I heard nothing. I could have saved her." Defense attorney Hernandez showed rare compassion, declining an aggressive cross-examination. She simply established one key point. "You never saw Zachary display violent behavior before that night?" she asked. "Never," Justin replied. "That's what makes it so incomprehensible. He was my brother." Hernandez asked, "You had no warning this could happen?" "None," Justin said. "If I had known—" Tears prevented further speech. The jury was visibly moved. Several jurors wiped their eyes. The prosecution then introduced the graphic crime scene photos. Reactions were visceral. Several jurors gasped. One covered her mouth. Another looked away briefly before forcing himself to look back. The photos showed the blood-soaked kitchen floor, the scattered groceries, the overturned chair from Kim's desperate struggle, and the handprint in blood where she'd tried to crawl toward the phone. The sheer volume of blood indicated catastrophic loss. Dr. Robert Hayes, the forensic pathologist, described Kim's injuries with clinical precision. Victim sustained 30 distinct stab wounds. The 8 were individually fatal, wounds to the heart, both lungs, the liver, and major vessels. Defensive wounds on her hands and forearms indicate she fought desperately for several minutes. The depth of the wounds indicates extreme force. This was a sustained, brutal attack with clear intent to kill. Dr. Patricia Wong, the blood spatter expert, used diagrams to reconstruct the attack. Blood spatter patterns indicate the victim was first attacked from behind while standing at the counter. She fell, attempted to crawl away, was attacked again from above while on the floor. Cast-off patterns on the ceiling show repeated overhead stabbing motions. Void patterns indicate the assailant stood in specific positions, moved deliberately. This wasn't a frenzied attack. This was methodical. The prosecution introduced the murder weapon, the 10-inch kitchen knife recovered from Davis's backpack. Kim's blood was still visible in the handle crevices despite cleaning attempts. Defendant attempted to clean the weapon, but blood evidence remained, the forensic expert testified. DNA matched the victim. Fingerprints matched the defendant. This is definitively the murder weapon, and the defendant definitively wielded it. Throughout the graphic testimony and photo presentation, Davis maintained a disturbing composure. He showed no visible distress, no emotional response to images of the woman he'd murdered. At one point, during a particularly graphic photo, he leaned over to whisper something to his defense attorney. A courtroom observer later reported, "He looked bored. She like he was sitting through a tedious lecture, not his own murder trial." The crime scene told a story of brutal murder. The defendant's face told a story of complete indifference, and the jury was capturing every horrifying detail. Chapter 10. I wanted to know what it felt like. The prosecution's most powerful evidence was the videotaped confession from the night of the arrest. Waldick warned the jury, "What you're about to hear is the defendant's own words, in his own voice, describing why and how he murdered Kim Mager. There is no ambiguity, no misunderstanding. He tells you exactly who he is." The courtroom lights dimmed and the large screen activated. The video showed Davis in the interrogation room, time-stamped 9:47 p.m., June 4, 2012, less than 3 hours after the murder. Detective Mitchell asked, "Zachary, why did you kill Kim?" There was a long pause. Then Davis spoke calmly. "I wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. I've wondered about it for years. Kim was available. She trusted me. That made it easier." Davis described the planning with disturbing precision. "I knew Justin wore noise-canceling headphones when gaming. I knew Kim got home from work around 6:45. I brought the knife from my house that morning, hid it in my backpack. I waited for her to be distracted at the counter. Then I did it." Mitchell asked, "Did what exactly?" Davis replied, "Stabbed her, multiple times. She fought back, which I expected, but eventually she stopped." The most damning moment came when Mitchell asked, "Do you feel bad about what you did?" Davis considered the question seriously. "No," he said. "Should I? I mean, it's done now. I can't change it. And honestly, it was interesting. The experience, I mean. I learned a lot about myself." Mitchell, visibly disturbed, asked, "You learned what?" Davis replied, "That I'm capable of more than I thought, that I'm not bound by normal rules." The camera captured the jurors' faces during the video: shock, disgust, horror. One juror shook her head slowly throughout. Another stared at Davis with undisguised revulsion. Several took extensive notes during his admission of premeditation. When the video ended and the lights came up, an uncomfortable silence filled the courtroom before the judge called a brief recess. The prosecution then introduced the chronological display of Davis's texts from the day of the murder. At 2:15 p.m., today might be the day. At 4:30 p.m., heading to Justin's. Now wish me luck. At 6:45 p.m., she just got home. It's happening. And at 11:47 p.m., just did something crazy. Feel so alive right now. Marcus Webb testified with visible guilt. "I got these messages throughout the day," he said. "I thought Zach was talking about asking out a girl or trying out for a team. When I got the 11:47 p.m. text saying he felt alive, I texted back, 'What did you do?' He replied, 'You'll see on the news tomorrow. It's going to be big.'" I still didn't understand. Then the next morning, I saw the news about Mrs. Mager, and Webb broke down, unable to continue. Prosecutor Waldick read selections from Davis's journal to the jury, his voice deliberately flat to let the words speak for themselves. March 2012. Chosen my target. She trusts me completely. And that's what makes her perfect. May 2012. Been researching techniques. Knife is most personal. I want to feel it. June 3rd, 2012, the day before the murder. Tomorrow is the day. I've planned everything. Justin will be upstairs. She'll never see it coming. I wonder if she'll understand why in those final moments. Probably not. Most people don't understand greatness. The split screen in the courtroom was devastating. Davis's smiling yearbook photo beside the journal page, describing Kim as the perfect target. Every word he wrote, every text he sent, every statement he made built an unbreakable case. He had documented his own evil, and now those words would condemn him. Chapter 11. The Defense's Impossible Task. Dr. Amanda Reeves, a forensic psychiatrist hired by the defense, testified about Davis's psychological state. "I evaluated Mr. Davis extensively," she said. "He suffers from antisocial personality disorder, which impairs his ability to feel empathy or remorse. This is a genuine mental illness, not a moral failing. His brain literally processes social and emotional information differently than neurotypical individuals." She presented brain imaging studies and adolescent development research. Teenage frontal lobes, responsible for impulse control and consequence evaluation, aren't fully developed until the mid-20s. Mr. Davis's brain, further compromised by personality disorder, simply couldn't process the wrongfulness of his actions the way an adult brain would. He needs treatment, not permanent incarceration. Prosecutor Waldick dismantled this theory methodically on cross-examination. "Dr. Reeves, you testified, Mr. Davis couldn't understand his actions were wrong, but he hid the weapon, correct?" "Yes," she replied. "He changed clothes to conceal blood evidence, correct?" "Yes." "He lied to police initially, correct?" "Yes." Those are the actions of someone who knew exactly what he did was wrong and tried to avoid consequences, correct? Reeves attempted to maintain her position. Understanding something is illegal doesn't mean understanding it's morally wrong. Waldick interrupted with Davis's own journal entry. "Doctor, please read this passage the defendant wrote 2 weeks before the murder." Reeves read, "I know what I'm planning is wrong. I know I'll go to prison if caught, but the experience will be worth it." "Doctor," he explicitly acknowledged wrongfulness. "How does that support your testimony?" The defense called Davis's mother, Patricia Davis, who testified tearfully about his troubled childhood. Zachary's father was emotionally distant. "I worked long hours. We didn't recognize the signs of his illness. We failed him as parents. If we'd gotten him help earlier, maybe." She broke down. The prosecution declined to cross-examine aggressively, letting the testimony stand, but knowing it wouldn't overcome the evidence of premeditated murder. The defense argued Davis met the legal standard for insanity, that he couldn't distinguish right from wrong. The prosecution countered with overwhelming evidence of planning, concealment, and Davis's own words acknowledging illegality. The judge instructed the jury on Ohio's insanity standard, making clear, knowing something is illegal demonstrates an understanding of wrongfulness. A mental illness alone does not equal legal insanity. The defense called Davis's former debate coach, hoping for positive testimony. Instead, it backfired. "Zachary was a brilliant student, but I always found him unsettling," the coach testified. "He lacked normal emotional responses. When we discussed ethical dilemmas in debate, he'd argue pro-genocide positions with disturbing enthusiasm. I thought it was an intellectual exercise. Now I wonder if I missed warning signs." Against counsel's advice, Davis insisted on testifying. He wanted them to hear his side. It was a disaster. His apology came across as insincere and self-serving. His affect remained flat. Under cross-examination, he admitted, "I don't really feel bad about it. I know I should, but I don't." Davis left the witness stand after catastrophic testimony, but his defense attorney's head in her hands. He had been given the opportunity to show humanity. Instead, he'd shown the jury exactly who he really was, someone incapable of genuine remorse. Chapter 12, Victim Impact, A Family Forever Destroyed. Tom Mager, Kim's ex-husband, took the stand. His voice was steady, but his eyes were haunted. "Kim and I divorced, but she remained my closest friend and the best co-parent I could imagine," he said. "She dedicated her life to our son, to her patients, to everyone she met. She treated Zachary like family, fed him, housed him, loved him, and he repaid that kindness by murdering her in her own kitchen. Our son will never recover from this. I will never recover, but the person responsible shows no remorse whatsoever." Justin returned to the stand for his full victim impact statement. He was more composed than during his earlier testimony, but devastatingly honest. "I lost my mother. I lost my best friend. I lost my sense of safety. I can't sleep without nightmares of that kitchen. I can't trust anyone. I dropped out of college because I couldn't focus. I've attempted suicide twice since Mom's death. And Zach sits over there, emotionless, like none of this matters. He destroyed our entire family. For what? An experience? My mother's life was worth more than his curiosity." 3 of Kim's fellow nurses testified about her character. "Kim was the heart of our floor," one said. "She stayed late to comfort dying patients' families. She volunteered for the hardest cases. She treated every patient like family. The day we learned she'd been murdered, our entire unit shut down emotionally. We lost more than a colleague. We lost our moral center. The Delphos mayor testified about the town-wide trauma. This is a small community where everyone knows everyone. Kim was a beloved figure. Her murder, especially by someone we all trusted, shattered our sense of safety. Parents no longer let their children's friends sleep over. Neighbors locked doors that were previously open. The psychological impact on our entire community cannot be overstated. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trauma specialist, testified about the long-term impact on Justin. Justin suffers from severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, and major depression. He believes he should have somehow prevented his mother's murder despite being upstairs with headphones. This guilt is irrational but overwhelming. He requires intensive ongoing therapy, and his psychological prognosis is guarded. The trauma of losing his mother this way, combined with the betrayal by his best friend, has fundamentally altered his psychological development. Kim's sister, Jennifer Hartley, delivered an emotional statement. Kim raised me after our parents died. She was more than a sister. She was my second mother. She taught me how to be compassionate, how to see the good in people. That kindness, that willingness to see good in Zachary Davis cost her life. She welcomed him into our family. She fed him, loved him, trusted him, and he butchered her. I will never forgive him, and his lack of remorse proves he doesn't deserve forgiveness. Tom testified about the financial and practical devastation. Kim's income supported Justin's college plans. Her life insurance barely covered funeral costs and medical bills. Justin had to withdraw from university. I had to take a second job to support him through therapy. We lost our family home because we couldn't maintain the mortgage without Kim's income. One person's evil decision created a financial catastrophe on top of emotional destruction. Throughout the devastating testimony, Davis maintained his disturbing composure. No tears, no visible remorse. When Justin described his suicide attempts, Davis briefly glanced at him, not with sympathy, but with what observers described as clinical curiosity. When Kim's sister called him evil, he shrugged slightly. The jury noticed everything. Tom concluded, "My ex-wife was murdered by someone she treated like family. My son's life is permanently destroyed. Our community is traumatized, and the person responsible feels nothing. If that's not evil, I don't know what is. We ask this court for the maximum sentence, not for vengeance, for justice. Kim deserves justice. Justin deserves justice. Our community deserves to know this person will never hurt anyone again." The final shot of the Major family leaving the witness stand, Tom supporting Justin, both wearing blue ribbons, passing within feet of Davis, who deliberately stared at the defense table, was a powerful image. They had shown him the complete destruction he caused. He had shown them he simply didn't care. The jury had seen enough. Chapter 13. Closing Arguments. The final battle defense attorney Hernandez made her final desperate plea. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard terrible evidence about a terrible crime. But I ask you to remember, Zachary Davis is 18 years old, and he suffers from severe mental illness that went undiagnosed and untreated. He grew up in an emotionally neglectful home. He consumed violent media that warped his developing mind. He made an unforgivable decision, but he is not an irredeemable monster. He is a sick teenager who needs treatment, not a life sentence that guarantees he'll die in prison." She continued her emotional appeal. "The prosecution wants you to see evil. I'm asking you to see illness. Antisocial personality disorder is a real documented mental illness. Zachary's brain literally processes empathy differently than yours or mine. That doesn't excuse his actions, but it explains them. If we sentence him to life without parole, we're saying sick people are disposable. We're saying mental illness deserves a death sentence. Is that the society we want to be? "I'm not asking you to excuse what he did," she concluded. "I'm asking you to consider who he is, a troubled teenager with untreated mental illness who made a catastrophic decision. Find him guilty of appropriate charges, but recommend mercy in sentencing. Give him the possibility of redemption, the possibility of treatment, the possibility of becoming someone better than his worst moment. That's real justice, not vengeance, but hope for rehabilitation." Prosecutor Waldick stood deliberately, making direct eye contact with each juror. "The defense wants you to focus on the defendant's illness. I want you to focus on his choices. He chose to research murder methods. He chose to buy a knife. He chose to hide it in his backpack. He chose to wait for the perfect moment. He chose to stab Kim Mager 30 times. He chose to change clothes to hide evidence. He chose to lie to police. These were choices, not symptoms. He dismantled the mental illness defense methodically. The defense says he couldn't understand his actions were wrong, but his own journal says, "I know what I'm planning is wrong. I know I'll go to prison if caught." He understood perfectly. He just didn't care. That's not mental illness. That's evil. Mental illness doesn't make you plan a murder for months. Mental illness doesn't make you text friends about feeling alive after killing someone. That's a choice. That's who he is. "The defense says he's just 18, Waldick continued. "But he was old enough to plan methodically for months, old enough to research murder techniques, old enough to manipulate Kim's trust, old enough to execute a brutal murder, old enough to try concealing evidence. If he's old enough to do all that, he's old enough to face adult consequences. Age doesn't excuse premeditated murder." His voice intensified with controlled passion. "Kim Mager was 47 years old, registered nurse, single mother, community volunteer, a woman who opened her home and heart to the defendant, and he murdered her for an experience. Not for money, not in self-defense, not in a moment of rage, for curiosity. To see what killing felt like. That's not illness. That's depravity." "You saw the crime scene photos," he reminded them. "You heard the confession video. You read the journal entries where he called Kim the perfect victim. You heard the text sent hours after the murder, 'Feel so alive.' You watched him testify without genuine remorse. You saw him smile during trial proceedings. Through all of it, one truth emerges. Zachary Davis is exactly who he showed you, someone who murdered a kind woman for personal gratification and feels no remorse whatsoever." Waldick concluded powerfully. "The defense asks for mercy, but mercy requires remorse. Rehabilitation requires recognition of wrongdoing. The defendant has shown neither. He had a plan. He had a victim. He had a motive, twisted though it was. Now he must have consequences. Not because of vengeance, because Kim Mager deserved to live, because Justin Mager deserves justice for his mother, because our community deserves to know this person will never hurt anyone again, because accountability matters regardless of age or illness." Waldick returned to the prosecution table and briefly placing a supportive hand on Tom Mager's shoulder. Davis stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, no emotion visible despite hearing his entire future debated. The final words had been spoken. The evidence had been presented. 12 citizens would now decide if a teenager who murdered for curiosity deserved life in prison. And everyone in that courtroom knew. This verdict would define justice. Chapter 14. Guilty. The smirk finally dies. The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. Courthouse observers debated endlessly. Would the youth factor sway them toward lesser charges? Would the overwhelming evidence override sympathy? Tension built throughout Delphos. The Mager family maintained a vigil in the courthouse chapel. Davis's mother paced the hallway, praying quietly. Media camped outside with live coverage. At 3:42 p.m. on day 2, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. The courtroom filled to capacity within minutes. The Mager family occupied the front row, holding hands in silent prayer. Davis entered, showing the first signs of nervousness. fidgeting hands, darting eyes, no longer maintaining his casual composure. Judge Gorman asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged teacher, replied, "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of aggravated murder with prior calculation and design, how do you find the defendant?" A long pause. The foreperson's clear voice rang out, "Guilty?" Kim's sister gasped, clutching her chest. "On the charge of tampering with evidence, how do you find?" "Guilty." Tom Mager closed his eyes, tears streaming silently. All charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. A complete conviction on every count. As the verdicts accumulated, Davis's expression shifted dramatically from forced calm to genuine shock to mounting panic. He whispered urgently to Hernandez, "What does this actually mean?" Hernandez, completely defeated, whispered back, "It means you'll likely spend your entire life in prison. Life without parole is now on the table." Davis's face showed the first genuine emotion throughout the trial, not remorse, but rage and self-pity. He pounded the defense table once before the bailiff moved to restrain him. The courtroom exploded with emotion. The Mager family embraced tearfully, overwhelmed with relief and vindication. Justin sobbed into his father's shoulder, the first time he'd shown emotion beyond his testimony. So community members in the gallery applauded until the judge banged the gavel demanding order. Davis's mother collapsed in the pew, wailing, "My baby, my baby." The defense team sat in stunned silence, knowing appeals would likely fail given the overwhelming evidence. The judge polled each juror individually to confirm the verdicts. All 12 affirmed their decisions unanimously. Later, several jurors spoke to the media. "His age was a factor we considered carefully," one said. "But the evidence was overwhelming. His own words, 'I wanted to know what it felt like,' showed this wasn't an impulsive mistake. This was calculated murder. The journal entries, the planning, the complete lack of remorse, we couldn't ignore that." Davis was remanded to the county jail without bail pending the sentencing hearing. As bailiffs led him away in shackles, he turned toward the Mager family. Justin stood, staring directly at his former best friend. Davis opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. No words could bridge that chasm. Justin whispered, "I hope you never get out." Davis looked away, finally understanding the permanence of his consequences. National coverage exploded. Teen honors student convicted of murdering friend's mother. Jury rejects mental illness defense in brutal stabbing. 17-year-old faces life for curiosity murder. Legal experts debated the implications, noting that this case reinforced that premeditation and brutality override youth considerations in capital cases. Delphos residents celebrated outside the courthouse. Blue ribbons, Kim's favorite color, were tied to trees throughout the town. A candlelight vigil was held at the hospital where Kim worked, hundreds of nurses, patients, and community members honoring her memory. The mayor issued a statement. "Justice has been served. Kim Mager can rest in peace, knowing her killer will be held fully accountable." Hernandez issued a statement promising an appeal. "We respect the jury's verdict, but believe the eventual sentence will be grossly disproportionate to the defendant's age and mental health needs," she said. Davis's mother was more blunt. "My son is sick, not evil. This isn't justice, it's revenge." Waldick held a press conference. "This verdict sends a clear message. Premeditated murder, regardless of the perpetrator's age, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent," he said. Kim Mager's family can finally begin healing, knowing the person who destroyed their lives will be held fully accountable. We will seek the maximum sentence, life without the possibility of parole. The split-screen finale showed the Mager family leaving the courthouse under the setting sun, embracing blue ribbons visible on their clothing, versus Davis in the transport van, handcuffed and shackled, staring out the window with an expression mixing disbelief and rage. The verdict was final. But the sentence, the ultimate judgment, was still to come. And it would be absolutely historic. Chapter 15. Life Without Mercy. Justice for Kim. 4 weeks. Post-verdict, the courtroom reconvened for the final sentencing phase. Judge Gorman had to determine the sentence: life with parole eligibility after 30 years or life without any possibility of parole. Under Ohio law, and both options were available for aggravated murder. The stakes were absolute. The decision would determine whether Davis ever saw freedom again. Hernandez presented final mitigation evidence, letters from mental health professionals recommending treatment over incarceration, testimony from a prison rehabilitation expert about young offenders' capacity for change, and Davis's mother's tearful final plea. "Please don't take my son's entire life away," she begged. "He's sick. He needs help. Give him a chance to redeem himself someday, please." Waldick countered with comprehensive aggravating circumstances. He cited the extreme premeditation, the brutal method, the victim's vulnerability, the betrayal of trust, the complete lack of remorse, and the ongoing danger Davis posed. "This defendant planned and executed a murder for personal gratification," Waldick argued. "He shows no capacity for genuine remorse. The maximum sentence is not only appropriate, but necessary for public safety." Tom Mager, the last to speak before sentencing, approached the microphone. "Your Honor, my ex-wife was murdered by someone she loved like family," he said. "My son's life is permanently destroyed. Our community is traumatized, and the person responsible has shown no genuine remorse." He smiled during the trial. He shrugged during victim impact statements. He called killing my ex-wife an experience. "I ask this court to ensure he never has the opportunity to hurt another family. Life without parole is the only appropriate sentence." Judge Gorman offered Davis a final opportunity to address the court. He stood and read from a prepared statement, clearly written by his attorney. "I'm sorry for what I did to Mrs. Mager and her family. I know my actions caused terrible pain. I wish I could take it back. I hope someday they can forgive me." The words were technically appropriate, but the delivery remained flat and unconvincing, the same lack of genuine emotion that characterized the entire trial. The Mager family remained unmoved. Judge Gorman paused, reviewed the entire case file, then addressed the packed courtroom. "This court has carefully considered all evidence, testimony, and arguments. The defendant was 17 at the time of this crime. However, his actions demonstrated adult-level planning, brutality, and a complete absence of conscience. He spent months planning the murder of a woman who treated him like family. He executed that plan with extreme violence. He showed no remorse afterward, texting a friend that he felt alive. He has shown no genuine remorse throughout these proceedings." She continued with gravity. "While the defendant's age constitutes a mitigating factor, it cannot overcome the severity of his crime, his extensive premeditation, and his complete lack of remorse. This court finds that the defendant poses an ongoing danger to society and has demonstrated no capacity for rehabilitation. The court's duty is protecting the public and delivering justice for the victim." She paused. "On the charge of aggravated murder with prior calculation and design, this court sentences the defendant to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted. The Mager family embraced, crying with relief and closure. Justin collapsed into his father's arms, sobbing, "It's over! It's finally over!" Davis's mother wailed inconsolably. Davis himself showed shock, then explosive rage. He shouted, "This is bullshit! I'm 18 years old! You're giving me a death sentence!" Judge Gorman responded sternly, "No, Mr. Davis. Kim Mager received a death sentence. You're receiving justice. Bailiff, remove the defendant." As bailiffs physically restrained the struggling Davis, he turned to the Mager family screaming, "She was just one person. My whole life is worth more than hers." The courtroom gasped at this final display of narcissism and lack of empathy. Tom Mager stood, his voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion. "No, son. Your life was worth something before you chose to murder my ex-wife. You made your choice. Now, live with the consequences." Davis was dragged from the courtroom screaming obscenities. Headlines nationwide read, "Teen sentenced to life without parole for murdering friend's mother. Judge, evil can wear face of youth. Ohio court delivers maximum sentence in brutal stabbing." Legal experts debated the case, noting it would be cited in juvenile sentencing hearings for decades, establishing that extreme premeditation and brutality can override age considerations. Delphos held a memorial service for Kim at the hospital where she worked. A plaque was installed. "In loving memory of Kim Mager, R.N., who dedicated her life to healing others and lost her life to senseless violence. May her kindness and compassion never be forgotten." Over 500 people attended. Justin spoke briefly. "Mom treated everyone with love, or even the person who killed her. I'm trying to honor her memory by not letting hatred consume me. But I'm grateful justice was served." Tom issued a final statement to the media. "We can finally begin true healing. Kim will never come back. Justin will carry these scars forever. But knowing her killer will never hurt another family gives us the peace we desperately needed. This case should remind everyone, trust is precious. Betrayal of that trust, especially through murder, demands absolute accountability." Zachary Davis will spend the rest of his natural life in an Ohio state prison. He will never attend college, never have a career, never have a family, never experience freedom again. Kim Mager will never see her son graduate, never meet grandchildren, never continue her life of service. One teenager's curiosity cost him everything. And the community learned that justice, when necessary, can be as absolute as the crime itself. If you believe justice was served, make sure others see this story. And ask yourself, should someone who murders for curiosity ever deserve a second chance? Was life without parole appropriate for a 17-year-old, or should rehabilitation always be considered? Share your thoughts below.